There is a space where you are all you need, where you are all you want. All there is here. Welcome to the Source Connection, conversations about who we truly are, the possibilities of creation and the new earth we are birthing, with your hosts, Tara Long and Liz B.
Welcome, everyone, to one more episode of The Source Connection. Some people call me Liz. I'm here with my co-host, Tara Long, and our very special guest, Dr. Julie Ponesse. Let's just take a moment together to just take a few long and deep breaths, coming into the field of coherence and togetherness. Let's do one long, deep inhale together. And let's just sigh it out. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, we're doing we recorded this week our longest episode, and this is going to be our shortest episode. So we're going
great.
From two extremes. I'd like to introduce Dr. Julie for a moment, and then we'll take it from there. She is a philosophy and ethics professor, now a pandemic ethics scholar for the Democracy Fund, teaching civil liberties, and she had just written a book called My Choice: The Ethical Case Against the COVID-19 Vaccine Mandates. And the way I got introduced to you was that beautiful video that you did for your students. And
Yes.
That's deeply, I saw this beautiful human being right there, just heart to heart. So thank you for that.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
Yeah, Julie, I saw that video too and just touched my heart right away, and I was crying with you. So thank you for that.
A lot of people all around the world have gone through, probably will go through the same thing. And it's, I think the emotion is not a personal, it's not for my personal situation. It's that we've gotten ourselves to this place in the world when, my goodness, we should have learned a lesson decades ago. Here we are again. And
yeah, absolutely. I want to start with this beautiful quote on your Instagram, which is, "We cannot be forced to be other than what we want to be in our souls," which points to, here at the Source Connection, we talk so much about being connected to whatever one wants to call it, soul or source, and how that, when we're connected with that, it points to our truth and being in alignment. And so as an ethics professor and talking about morals all the time, my question for you is, how do you feel being connected to our soul is related to our moral compass?
Yeah, I think the question you're asking is a little bit of a different one from what was meant by the quotation, but they're both good and interesting questions. And what I was thinking there is that I think so many people now feel like they have lost the ability to make decisions about their lives. And people will say, well, I'm forced to quit my job. I'm forced to take a vaccine. I'm forced to I can't travel anymore. And it's true that so many, things that were possibilities for us maybe a while ago are not possible anymore. And there's harm in that. There's an injustice in that. But I think we need to realize that, those things are beyond our control to a certain extent. But that doesn't need to dictate who we are. It doesn't need to make us, bitter or resentful or distrusting, we might be legitimately less trusting of certain people than we used to be, but we don't need to allow it to change our character. And our character is the thing that's up to us. So when I'm talking about in the soul, our character, who we are, what we believe fundamentally, what our dispositions are towards things like courage and generosity and openness and tolerance and trusting. And so, you bring up the moral compass, and I think a lot of people, moral compass, and I think another way of describing that is that it's your intuitive sense about whether something is right or wrong. And wonder, where does that come from? I think it's natural in a certain sense in virtue of being a human being, but it can also be cultivated. So children who have had, good examples and had a good upbringing, and, they received good kinds of instruction, not formal, but informal, have a better, more developed sense of a moral compass than other people. And, you can have those pangs of conscience, but it's up to you whether you choose to listen to them. And then it's further up to you whether you choose, to act on them or not. So there's still a lot of room for choice in terms of what we believe, what we decide in this world, even though the sphere of choice is kind of becoming tighter and tighter, right?
Yeah. I'd like for us to define ethics, because I feel like it seems, where's the place of ethics right now, as we've gone through 2 years of this complete destruction of what we thought life was in institutions and government, all of that. So when I think of ethics, I think of a set of moral principles, right? A theory that kind of governs a guiding philosophy. And so I guess my question is, how would you describe that? And what do you think moving forward is the place for that, and how do we cultivate it?
Absolutely. I think that's a good way of describing it. Another way to think of it is that it's, when we're talking about ethics, we're talking about normative questions, or questions that often have should or ought in them, right? So we're not just interested in what's factually true, what's possible for humans to do. We're interested in what we should do, what's the best thing to do from that realm of possibility. And, then ethicists disagree about that. So they talk about happiness or duty or character or virtue, and they disagree about, and that's why I think we now have this disagreement about whether something like autonomy and personal freedom is the overriding moral principle, or whether it's something more like collectivism and our obligation to the group. And this, fundamental moral disagreement that has been generated by this COVID situation is really between those two things. It's about whether or not the individual is primary or the group is primary. Of course, there are a lot of scientific questions, and I think there are problems with how, science has evolved over the last couple of years. There are problems with what we take science to be. There's problems with, the fact that we don't really have an open system in which, there's a free exchange of ideas. I don't think we're being careful about the evidence. I don't think we have enough data, enough studies that are being careful. And then we're using the conclusions of those studies that, in my view, aren't being careful to inform policies that are restricting people's freedom and civil liberties. So, there are a lot of people, academics included, who just dismiss ethics as either, useless, misguided, or non-existent. That's part, I think, of our sort of heavy reliance on science these days. We've gotten a kind of hubris. I think science has done a lot for us. There have been great advancements, I suppose, in technology and medicine, and but that's not. You hear a lot about someone like Elon Musk these days, and everybody bows to Elon Musk because he has how many billions of dollars, and he seems to know all kinds of things about, technology. Well, that's great, but that is not deciding technological questions does not decide moral questions. It doesn't, the more technically advanced society is, that doesn't necessarily mean that society has more virtue in it, or that those people are happier or more flourishing, or that they have better human relationships, or that there's more trust between them. They're different questions in my mind. And I think the latter questions I mentioned are perennial, because human nature is the same. We encounter different challenges. We used to have more, physical wars between ourselves, and now we fight in different ways. We fight in social media. We fight through the media. We fight in passive aggressive ways through, and our world is very different technologically. The internet has made all of that very different, but we are not fundamentally different beings in terms of our nature. And I think the moral questions in virtue of that are not fundamentally different. We still need to understand how best to treat each other. And I think we're failing massively at that, or many of us are anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And if we go back to that, not being able to be other than what we are in our souls, that is when we do have or find that connection, then Liz and I were talking earlier, it's almost impossible to want to do harm, because I believe, and it's an opinion, I guess, that our true nature is actually good and that we want to be good to each other and help each other.
Yeah, we're not always that right. Those are two different questions. So are we fundamentally altruistic and concerned about helping other people? And are we always good at figuring out how to do that?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And here, right? I think that this is a reflection of that time, of the justification of I'm doing this because I need to do it for someone else versus I'm doing what I feel it's best for me, and that will affect everybody anyways.
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly how the debate is sort of getting cast. I think also there's a kind of, all this virtue signaling and this sense of righteousness that, an unvaccinated person, for example, is a bad person because clearly they don't care for others. Well, they might very well care for others and believe that, the evidence leads them to draw the conclusion that it is better for others to hold that position. So there's a question about, whether or not we're selfish. And there's a question about whether or not what we're doing is actually, helping or hurting other people. And so we've allowed kind of that moral conversation to stall the factual one. If that makes sense.
Yes.
And so in your exploration with the conversations you've been having since, that video came out and everything kind of just sprouted out of that. First, my question is, what was the response from your students and, the people you were making that video for? Obviously went viral and it touched other people.
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, for it to go viral, it meant a lot to other people, but the people it didn't seem to mean anything to were my students. So I heard from like maybe 2 or 3 who disagreed and thought I was a danger to society and don't deserve to be teaching ethics. And then I have since heard from a couple who are much more sympathetic and more open, to discussing this, even if they're not on this side. But it's been pretty it's been quite silent. It was, and that's a very weird within academia, right? For there to be that kind of lack of discussion, especially when the topic is so important and so kind of inflammatory, right? You would expect the opposite to be true.
Right.
And how do you think we got here? With that so taboo, especially where you're discussing and you're coming up with thoughts and conversing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only COVID that's like that, right? The first topic that I remember in ethics feeling taboo like this was abortion. This was the thing that, we could talk about other things. We could talk about capital punishment. We could talk at the time about euthanasia. We could talk about Holocaust. We could talk, we could talk about lying, murder, all these things. But abortion was very, was very taboo. And I think we have, COVID has become that way now. The gender identity politics has become that way. Race has become that way to the point where we don't even understand what race is anymore, or whether or not it should matter, right? And it seemed like a while ago, with something like race or gender, it was bad if you took too much account of those things. And now it's bad if you don't take enough account of those things. And I think we're at a point where people don't know what we're supposed to think anymore. So we better not say anything, right?
Right.
So I think COVID is, not the only issue about which we have found ourselves unable to discourse,
And what do you see as the moving forward? Like, when I think about everything that has happened, I feel this contraction in, the words that come up to me are like violence in language and behavior, in governance, in this disassociation, right? This authority following with not a lot of critical thinking and involvement, almost like participation, a lack of participation. And, I think of the contrast of that, the flow of ideas and open communication and that bounce and just that richness. And in those conversations and everything that you've been living through this time, do you foresee a way or ways that we can continue to foster that or plant those seeds?
I do feel, the reason I think we got to this point is because we stopped seeing people as being valuable as individuals, and we started seeing them as having value only to the group, only to the tribe, only to the collective. And I don't think we can move. And that's not to say that community isn't important. It's not to say that relationship or bonds between people are important, but it is to say that, if we start thinking of people as having value only insofar as they are the member of a tribe, then they can be sacrificed and traded and bartered without any reference to who they are as individuals. And all the things you were just mentioning, ideas exchange and open discourse, those are all verbs that refer to actions between individuals, right? Of course, you can do that in a group, but it happens only because there's a difference of opinion and you decide to share those differences and talk about those differences. So I think I really do think we did a big disservice to young people. This is going to sound sort of trite, but giving every kid a trophy where we told them that you are identical to everyone else. And you either there are no differences between you and other kids, or those differences don't matter. And I think we were coming from a good place in some sense. We wanted to make sure that kids didn't feel like if they were shorter or had red hair or whatever it was, that we didn't want them to feel badly as a result of that. But I think the result, we pushed that so hard, the result is now they don't have any kind of identity or any kind of integrity or any belief in their own self-worth. And that's not something that's fixed overnight. That's something that's fixed in the home by parents, how we treat each other, how we model behavior for our children, and then, of course, how that's enforced when they go out into the world. But these are big cultural, I think we need to realize that human beings will never be identical to one another unless we manipulate it to be so.
Right.
So we can choose to ignore that fact or embrace that fact. And if we embrace it, we can choose to stigmatize those who are different, or we can choose to embrace. These are our choices, and I think we will not. I think we're in a bit of an identity crisis culturally because we're trying to pretend we're something we're not. Which is identical people, robots whose obligation is to sacrifice to the group.
Yes. And if you don't know who you are, then how can you be connected to your own truth, right?
That's right. And how can you feel like any kind of power to defend your own ideas, right? Yeah. Why would you?
Yeah, exactly. So the last question we'll ask today, Julie, is for you. What have you learned in your search for whatever truth is for you? What have you learned about yourself? What has come that you maybe didn't know before about yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I think one thing I've learned is that there is, earlier on, one of the questions I would get in interviews a lot was, what does it feel like to be so hated? And then I don't know what I said initially, but then I started thinking about that question. So, well, people are going to be asking me this. What do I think about it? And I got to the point where I just realized it's kind of freeing because you don't have to worry anymore about, tiptoeing around this idea or that because I might lose my social position somehow. Well, if you've already fallen down, 9 pegs or something, and then you realize, well, what does the fall involve? Well, it involves not being welcomed by people who turn out to exhibit bad behavior in the first place. And so, you have less comfort in a broader group, I guess. But then you also find people who have been very courageous and who are very, deep thinkers that you wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet anyway. And so I do feel like it's kind of freeing. I feel like now I can really say whatever I want, provided it's thoughtful, and I'm not risking losing anything because I've lost those things that you could risk by voicing your opinion.
Yes.
You can't be fired again. My current employer is going to fire me for speaking my mind, but we'll see. Got hired for that reason, I think. So,
yes.
Anyway, joking aside, but when you've lost all these things that keep us from speaking out, and then you do it, you do feel like you kind of embrace what it is to be human, and there's something very good about that.
Wow, that's so beautiful.
Just also know that in contrast with whatever it is that's being set out there, you rose as a beacon of light and hope. So,
yeah, thank you so much, Julie, for everything that you do, continue to do, and
and
we appreciate you.
Yeah, we'll link you up in the description of the podcast. And thank you so much for sharing your time and your presence with us today.
Thank you to you both. Lovely questions, lovely discussion. You have a good afternoon.
Thanks. You too, Julie. Bye-bye.